Welcome back to Gloved Up Garage. So I've got a set of Notchback Foxbody quarter windows that I'm going to restore for a customer. And if you can tell, the rubber around the window is kind of pitted. We've got a little bit of primer or something on this, maybe some wax or something. We'll clean that up a little bit later. This area here is pitted. It's dipped in quite a bit on this rubber. And this area right here is pitted as well. This is the driver's side. This is the passenger side. So the plan when you're restoring these, basically what you're going to do is you're going to scuff the surface. This side is still quite smooth. This is what they would look like from the factory. This passenger side is actually in very good shape. There's hardly any pitting on the surface. But basically you clean all this off with some wax and grease remover. We're going to sand these up with probably about a 180 grit to start, just to rough up this rubber. So this, even though it looks pretty hard, it's actually very flexible. It's a vulcanized rubber that they put around the outside of the glass. On the back side is the frame that they use to mount the window to the car. There's, I think there's 6 or 7 studs where the window actually bolts onto the car. And this rubber is exposed to UV light, you know, the external environment, stuff like that. So the cars that were kept in a little better shape, these tend to look a little better. In this case, I would think what happened was that this side was probably more exposed to sunlight and the elements than the passenger side. You can tell how shiny this thing is, and this is really, really good shape. So this will not take a lot of work. We'll do a very small skim coat of material. We'll fix some of the little imperfections, like right here we've got a little bit of a high spot, so we'll get that sanded out, and then we'll get a good coat of primer and then a good coat of Trim Black, which is a little bit flatter than what you would see the factory finish on these. Now this side, being that it's very, very rough and we're going to have to do a lot of repair work, this is going to take some additional material that I'll show you guys in just a minute what I use. Watching other videos on YouTube of how to restore these quarter windows, I've seen other people use a different material than what I typically have used in the past. I've done several sets of these over the years, and I've never really had any complaints about longevity. Some of the cars have been kept outside, some of them were kept inside. What I found lasted the longest for my material, this is a 3M, it's a flexible parts repair, basically a filler, and you can use a very thick amount of this. You really don't want to use more than like 1/8 to a 1/4 inch of material, but you can go thicker with this if you really need to. This is really good for flexible bumpers, like urethane and plastic bumpers. That's mainly what this is used for in the automotive repair industry. Now, the other side of that, I will use this to fill in these perfections and these deeper marks in the rubber, and I'll use it to fill in some of the other imperfections on this, basically to glide over this area that's very, very rough. And then I'll use a glazing putty like this Easy Sand. This is also a flexible filler that's used for bumper repair in the automotive industry, in the body shop world. I know some people will say, well, that's not what we use. The shops that I have been at in the past, this is what we use to repair bumpers after we used a flexible filler underneath of it. This does flex to an extent. It is not perfect. It is not going to bend more than 45 degrees or so. So it's not like a silicone or something like that, that really has a lot of flex to it. It's just designed to go over this stuff as a skim coat and then remain flexible enough to move with the rubber that's underneath of it. So I'm going to throw some gloves on, and then I'm going to get started cleaning these windows real quick, and then we're going to lay down some masking tape to cover up the edge. Basically right here, I'm going to get up to this rubber as close as I possibly can, and I've even got a little X-Acto knife over here in order to trim the masking tape to get into these corners really good. Alright, I got some gloves on, so I'm going to shoot some window cleaner on this glass. And we'll scrub it really good with our paper towel. Now, I prefer to use the Dollar General brand because, well, it's cheap and it works pretty good. So with our window cleaner on there, I'm just going to take a paper towel, Make sure I get all the fingerprints, all the oil, wax, all that kind of stuff off of the glass itself. If there was any kind of overspray or anything on the glass, I would break out some very fine steel wool and then scrub that glass with that steel wool to get that off. That will be something I'll go back at the end and actually do to get any kind of residue from my masking tape off of the glass too. I'm not really feeling anything. There's really nothing stuck to this glass. So, and I really don't even have to push that hard on this. It's very, very good condition for what it is. All right, so we've got that clean. I'm going to clean the other one, and then I'll show you how I start to put the masking tape on. I've already sprayed some of the cleaner over here on this passenger side, but I'll get this clean and we'll come back. All right, now both of our windows are clean. I'm going to get my masking tape. I'll probably take my gloves back off for this just because it sticks to the glove too much, but I'm going to go right up against the edge of the rubber, and there is about 1/8 of an inch lip on these quarter windows. And depending upon how worn down that rubber is will depend upon how tall that lip is. You can see the passenger side that's in really good shape. You know, it's got a lip right there from the rubber to the glass. Same thing on the driver's side, but this area right here is worn down quite a bit. So we're still a pretty decent height. It's not completely worn. I have seen some cars where this wears down completely flush to the glass. That's a completely different process of building that material up. That's where that flexible filler really comes into play. You just create your line nice and straight, and you keep building that material up until you get the desired height, which again, it's about 1/8 of an inch or so. So I'll go through and I'll tape these off and get them ready, and then we'll start the masking process. All right, got the driver's side taped up. It was way too difficult for me trying to hold the camera and do this. This takes a little bit of precision because I want to get the tape right up against the rubber the best I can, get it trimmed into these corners so that it actually looks correct and round in the corners and not like squared off. And I know it's kind of hard to see like on the camera, but the tape actually goes up under the rubber a little bit in the corners because the rubber does sit off of the glass. So it actually looks pretty decent from a distance. Now, this is just the first layer of tape. I'll go back over this. I've got to run to the store and get the 2-inch tape, and I'll go over top of that with 2-inch tape. And I do the fine line tape so that it's a little easier to get up against the surface. That gives me my good edge in here, and it also gives me some protection on the glass so that when I'm sanding this, I'm not going to go through just one layer of tape and potentially scratch the glass. With 2 layers of tape, and then I'll go over top of it with some masking paper, it's pretty well protected. I have never had one go through both layers. You know, sometimes when I'm sanding, it'll get through, especially when there's not this lip here. This one's going to be pretty easy because there is such a great distance between the glass and the rubber, but it's those ones where they're pretty flush that make it very, very difficult, and you have a higher potential of scratching the glass. So I'll get some more masking tape, some masking paper. We'll get the passenger side all taped off as well, and then we'll come back once I'm ready for the next step. The driver's side all taped up and masked off. Basically started with that 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch tape around the edges, went back over top of it with this 1.5 inch, and then we've got some just regular masking paper type stuff that I think I got that from Lowe's or Walmart or something. But anyway, you can use anything. You can use brown paper bags. It's going to get soaked with primer and paint, but it won't actually go through it. And if it does, it goes onto the glass right in the middle, and it won't matter because it'll clean off with some steel wool. So we got this driver's side all ready to go. We'll start sanding on this stuff around the edges, like these rough spots. And I grabbed some 220. This is Velcro back 220. And then I've got my sanding block here too. Get it out from under the window. But basically this stuff just Velcros right onto my sanding block. And I use Durablocks. They make those in 2 different versions. One with the Velcro back, and then they've got some that have a sticky back. I prefer the Velcro. I think it's cleaner. It stays cleaner longer. But I'll start sanding on this window with this 220 to knock down some of this pitting and stuff, and to give the filler a good bite. I've still got to tape off the passenger side window the rest of the way, and I'll get that done. The passenger side really isn't going to need very much of attention. Like I said, it's just going to need kind of a skim coat. So we'll kind of wait till last to work on the passenger side. I'll wind up primering and painting them both at the same time, but I want to get the one that needs the most attention tackled first, because these materials do take a little bit of time to cure. And while the material is curing on this driver's side, then I can move on to the passenger side and do the minor work on it that it needs. Now both of them are taped up, and the next most important thing, wax and grease remover. So over the years, you're going to get wax and stuff built up on the edges of these windows. You can see some of these run over it with some wax. This is probably wax built up on the edge, and you really don't want that stuff in your filler, because it will react with the filler and it'll cause an issue where it lifts out. And that's the white gray texture inside of this. That's wax from the car, from the body work that somebody, has overlapped onto these windows, like right here too. So we got to get that cleaned out the best that we can. It's not going to come all the way out, but I at least need to try to get some of it out. So we'll use just a blue shop towel, and we'll use some of this wax and grease remover from SPI, and that will hopefully get a majority of it out and off of the surface, and then I can start to sand. First pass with the 220 on this driver's side turned out really well. I'm impressed with what I'm seeing. A lot of these rougher areas smoothed out, so I'm very happy about that. The only area that's really going to need some attention with the thicker filler that I have would be these two dips here, and this little dip here in the middle where the rubber had deteriorated. I think once I get some, basically just a skim coat of that thicker filler in there, I'll be able to go over top of it with the thinner coat, just like the rest of the outside. This upper area that was kind of textured and rough, well, it's still textured, but I believe this will fill in just fine. And the same thing up here with this corner, it was kind of textured. It's going to be good. Now the goal is to put a very thin coat of filler on the entire thing, and then block it out from there so that it's nice and level and smooth. And you'll see how I do that. It's going to look very messy in the beginning, but essentially when I'm done, it'll be a very thin skim coat of filler around the entire perimeter of this window. So it'll be nice, smooth. You won't be able to see sanding marks. You're not going to see any kind of waves or anything like that. That is the goal. And it takes quite a bit of time to do this. This isn't something that you can really knock out in just a couple of hours. This is an entire process. Start to finish at this point, I'm about an hour into it, and I've still got at least 2 to 3 hours worth of work before I ever put the first coat of primer on. So that'll give you an idea. I mean, this is really something that you need a weekend to do, where you can pull the car in, get it out of the weather, get the windows out. Just getting the windows out of these Foxbodies can take you a couple of hours by the time you pull the plastics out and unbolt the windows from the car, and then get all the butyl rubber that's on the back side of the window off. Then you can get it out and you can start this process. So I've got it all wiped down and we're ready to put some filler on. And this filler works a little different than some of the other fillers that are out there. So you've got a part A, a part B, and these are mixed equally. Usually with some of the other fillers on the market, like this Evercoat, you have kind of a 10 to 1 mix. You want 10 part filler to 1 part hardener. They kind of tell you to put down a size about the size of a baseball, and then the hardener is about the size of a quarter or so, and then you mix it together and watch the color change. The more hardener you put in, kind of the quicker it wants to dry. This stuff being A and B, it's going to be pretty simple. It's only going to set up as fast as it's going to set. There's really no way to change any of this. So I'll mix part A and part B, 2 lines together in the middle of my palette here. And these pallets you can find at some body shop supplies. These are really nice because it's basically really thick sheets of paper, and it allows you to mix your fillers on here. Normally it's flat, but this thing's been out here in the garage for a while, so it's kind of warped up from some of the moisture and humidity. But so you mix it on here, and then you can apply it. Once it hardens up on this pad, you just rip the sheet off, throw it away, move on to the next one. I don't know how many sheets are on there. There's a bunch. I've had this thing for years, and I'm still not all the way down to the bottom. And I think this cost me around 20 bucks or so, so it's definitely worth it. Some people use cardboard. I've got a stainless steel one in there that I used to use before I bought this, but this works great. We've got our part A on the left, our part B on the right. It's got a little bit of separation in there, but it should be just fine. We'll get this mixed up. It does look a lot like JB Weld. It kind of smells like JB Weld, but unlike JB Weld, this stays flexible. JB Weld hardens into, you know, a very steel-like substance. This is a very flexible substance. Once it hardens, it's some sort of rubber or something. So we'll get this mixed up, and then I'll come back after I get my skim coat into these low areas right here. All right, we got the first coat of filler on. I've still got quite a bit of a low spot right in here. It's really hard to see on camera. If I bring it down, you might be able to see where it's dipped in right there. So we'll probably have to go back over this with just another coat and see where that gets us. I got into a groove and I jumped way ahead. So I was able to finally get a ton of filler in these low sections here, and I got it brought back up to an area that I'm happy with. Now you'll see that there's a lot of waves and stuff that are still in this. I've still got a ton of sanding to do. This is just my first coat of primer. I threw 2 really heavy coats on there. This is SEM Highbuild Primer that comes in a spray can, and I use Highbuild to fill in a lot of these pinholes. Now with Highbuild, this really needs to bake out in between coats. So the 2 heavy coats that I put on there, I'm going to let this sit overnight. I'll come back out here and get back on this in the morning. But I really wanted to get some primer on there just to see how much of these pinholes and stuff that were in here would fill up. And just as I suspected, a majority of them did fill up. Now I've got to work on the edges because you can see they're pretty rough. I've still got to work on some of these areas here, kind of reforming this edge here that was deteriorated to the point where it just had really big dips. And then this area up here, I've really got to work on it as well. Just kind of reforming all of this stuff. Now there are some other, pinholes and some stuff that I'm going to have to address, but for the first coat, I'm really, really happy with the way it turned out. So start to finish, at this point, I've got my first coat of primer on. I've been out here since about 8 o'clock, actually closer to 7:30. It's now 10 o'clock. So we're 2.5 hours in for tonight. And leading up to this point tonight, I was roughly about 3 to 4 hours into this. So we're at 7 to 8 hours at this point, and I'm only got my first coat of primer. I've still got a lot more blocking and sanding to do before I'll put my final coat of primer on, and that will need to cure for a day, and then I can hit it with the black. We'll go from there. So I'm going to let this dry. We'll come back in the morning. We'll do some more sanding. I'm probably going to get back into the groove and then just cut back into this on my final coat of primer just to let you guys see what it looks like at that point. Jumped ahead a little bit and got the final coat of primer onto this driver's side. There's a couple little things that I touched up after I got done sanding the last coat of filler. Went through with a couple of hits of spot glaze and got those little gouges and stuff filled in. This is the passenger side. I went ahead and hit a few of the smaller spots that I could see with a little bit of putty just to start. You can kind of see a little bit there through the primer. I mean, it was like 5 or 6 spots on this window that really just needed just a very small touch of filler. I will probably go over this one more time with some filler because I do see a couple of rough areas like along these edges. It does look a little rough. You can see a line forming there, a couple little pinholes. And then I know what's going to happen once this primer dries on this side. This will start to shrink in. This was very, very rough. I hit this with at least 2 or 3 heavy coats of primer because there was a lot of sanding scratches on this. And I'm not really sure if it was for me. I don't believe it was. It almost looked like dry rotting cracks were starting to form on this edge. So now that we've got that sanded down and primed, and we're going to let it dry for at least 8 hours, we'll go over top of it with some guide coat. We'll see where it leaves us. And again, I'll probably do another skim coat on this passenger side before I'm done. So we got the last coat of primer on the passenger side, and it is now just about ready. I'm going to let it dry overnight, let it outgas before we put the trim black on. This side I laid on 2 very heavy coats of trim black because I do plan to sand this back down. And because of the humidity out here, you can see it's a little cloudy. It's still shiny in a few spots. This will flatten out to almost a semi-gloss finish. It's hard to see on camera, but it is a little cloudy right here. And that's because of the humidity in the air. We had some rain move through about an hour ago. I wanted to go ahead and get some black on it before the night was over, just so this would have a chance to set up overnight and dry, and I can come back out here tomorrow, sand this down, and put the final coat of black on this driver's side. And I'm pretty impressed. This really came out very nice. I hope the owner is going to be just as impressed with it as I am. It did take a lot of work to get it to this point. Definitely not the worst one I've done, but there was a couple of challenging spots on this. And moving back over to the passenger side, we do have a little bit of work still left to do. After that last coat of primer is put on, there was an area here that it didn't quite get enough coverage on. So I don't want to mix materials. That's where a lot of issues come up when you're doing body work. You start with 1 can of primer, you move on to the next can that you get from AutoZone or whatever. You mix materials by different manufacturers. You always want to stay with the same material that you started with, you want to finish with. So I've got to pick up a can of SEM filler primer so that I can finish knocking out that little spot right there. Once I get some primer on that, it'll be able to set up in just a few hours with the heat and the humidity we've got. Then I can lay on my black, and I'll have these finished up by this coming weekend for this gentleman. 3rd coat of black on the driver's side and 2nd coat of black on the passenger side. These things are turning out really slick. This paint's still wet, so it's still a little shiny. This should flatten out quite a bit to almost a semi-gloss finish, and then that's when I know that they'll be done. So the driver's side with this last coat, now we got 3 coats on there. That'll be it for this one. I'll go through and check. It looks like there's a couple little spots where the can is spattering. So we might need to put 1 more coat after we hit it with some sandpaper to take care of the texture. Basically, the last coat just kind of gives you a texture coat. With that, the driver's side will be done. I'll put a couple more coats of black on this passenger side, and then we'll be done with it. We've got a total of 4 coats of black on each window, and then we let them sit for 24 hours to cure out before I remove the masking tape. Now, while it's still wet, I do go around the edge just to make sure that the paint on the window doesn't stick to the paint on the masking paper and the masking tape. That's so you don't lift any paint when you start peeling that stuff off. You might see in the reflection that there's a little bit of water spotting and stuff on the glass. I did try to clean this with some 4/0 steel wool, and unfortunately those water spots did not come off. So that glass is going to require some polishing. Both of these are pretty much the same. They've got some water spots on them. Leads me to believe that it was probably exposed to some sort of acid rain or really hard water at some point. So the cost on these windows, if you were to buy a brand new set of reproduction quarter windows for a Notchback Mustang, they usually run around $800 to $1,000. That was the last time that I checked. I know that they're selling some blemish units out there for about $600 to $700. And I know that there's a service that you can send your glass off. They actually cut the glass out of the rubber, put the glass into a new mold, inject new rubber in it. And that's so you can preserve the Mustang logo that's in the glass. As far as what I charge to do these windows, it's about half the cost of those blemished units. And it really depends upon how much time and material I have to put into it. Just to throw a price range out there, we're between $250 and $400. And again, it really depends upon the severity of the window, how bad it is. There's some that I just cannot save. If the edge of the glass is actually showing through the rubber, I can't save that. I'm not going to guarantee that it will stick. And I don't want to have all of that material and time wasted because it wouldn't stick to the glass. So I have never attempted to get one that was that far gone. I have just done some testing here and there on my material. I know what sticks to the glass and what doesn't. And there's just no way that that material will stick to the glass. I have to have some rubber that's actually surrounded around the lip of the glass in order to get that to work. So if your glass is showing through the rubber, send them off, get them redone. There's nothing I can do for them. But with all of that being said, I know it's kind of a longer video. I appreciate you guys sticking in there. This is just something that I've done in the past. I wanted to show you all. A little different from my normal content, especially with the Marauder and the Town Car. I know I've been focusing a little bit on the Panther car platform a little bit, but my history lies in the Fox bodies. I had many, many Fox bodies before I ever had the first Marauder. So I've learned a lot of stuff, and I've done a lot of these windows through the years. Thank you guys so much for watching. Drop your comments down below. Let me know what you all think about this. Share this video with anybody that has a Fox body with some rough quarter windows to let them know how I did this. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Remember, stay gloved up.